Hello and welcome to today's episode in the Food and Mood series, part of Mental Health Awareness Month. Today I am speaking with Alisa Bloom, who is a friend and registered dietitian. She's the owner of Live Your Best 365. She's been in practice for over 25 years now, and really takes a behavioral and lifestyle-based approach to working with her clients using nutrition and related lifestyle factors. And she really specializes in kind of taking a cluster of seemingly unrelated symptoms and making sense of them. You know, part of what she does is she talks about nutrition and mood and nutrition and brain health. And so I thought she would be a great person to come on and chat a little bit about folate, a nutrient that, as you'll soon see, is really critical for mood and mental health. So Alisa's going to fill us in on some of the details with that. So Alisa, welcome. Thanks for making the time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay. So fill us in on a little bit of background. Why did you start thinking about all of this? How did you first become aware of this connection, either between nutrition and mental health or just folate and brain and mental health?
Well, I kind of stumbled upon it almost by happenstance, but it came at a very wonderful time to have stumbled upon it. I think that I personally, I've always been sensitive to food and medications and didn't really understand why, although there was a strong family history around it. And when things came to a head for me, I remember that I had been on some vitamin D supplementation, as is common, especially for here in the Midwest. And the vitamin D form that I was on, I would have no idea that was putting a burden on my body that needed a form of folate to convert and make that better active for me. And then that period of time in my life fed right into surgery that I had in my hand, and part of an anesthetic that was given to me, I had no idea that I couldn't methylate that or have that onto get the anesthesia out of my body. So I ended up having a pretty severe reaction. And as I recovered from that and moved through, more things had come up. And it became very obvious when a lot of self-discovery and guided discovery to the fact that the source and root of the problem was that I couldn't convert common foods and medications.
Mm-hmm. And that's because of really what's happening with you and many people on a genetic level. You mentioned methylation. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that term means? Just really, really high level overview.
Of methylation. Well, basically that our bodies are full of drivers and reactions and things that make us go, if you will, and they're driven by enzymes. And you start with product A that may come into you, and an enzyme or a conversion or a type of reaction needs to occur to get that product A to product B to be active in your body and make use of what the product was supposed to be. If we don't have those specific pathways or those enzymes that make that pathway go, that's when problems arise.
Mm-hmm. So that process of methylation is kind of like the Kickstarter. You're adding methyl groups and activating different pathways, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So this relates to folate because folate is one of those nutrients that can sometimes get hung up. It doesn't convert well into its active form because of some of these genetic and methylation issues, right? So it's really interesting. So before we kind of dive into that a little bit, can you talk us through the connection between folate and mood? You know, whatever you're aware of, what you see in your clients.
Mm-hmm. Generally, the folate, and I know we'll get into this in a little bit, but the folate that we're talking about is the actual active folate form that our bodies uptake, and it's different from the synthetic form. And when we don't have enough of the active folate to help get through our brain cells, it affects not just primarily, if you do any search or basic search, you'll get inflammation that comes up when your bodies can't convert or have this active form of folate. But there also tends to be history of anxiety, depression, other types of mood disorders, whether they're clinical or subclinical, meaning whether there's an actual diagnosis or there isn't. It's just, it affects your mood, and it goes right to that gut-brain connection, where the folate part is in the brain that helps activate the gut, and vice versa. It's a fluid system.
So you're mentioning the active form, of folate. And so kind of the opposite of that, or the step before active folate, would be folic acid, right? So yeah, so for people who aren't really aware, because I mean, you and I know folic acid is in a lot of supplements, added to a lot of different processed foods. So how does that relate? All the folic acid that we have in our food supply, do you think, to some of the mental health concerns that we might be seeing possibly?
Well, it's interesting because there are studies that are starting to point to that. The food supply in the United States, the wheat supply, was fortified with folic acid back in the 1990s. And as a result from that, if you look back at when the prevalence of certain inflammatory conditions, whether or not they can be explained, and if you other types of conditions that are even mood related and activity and spectrum type related disorders, they seem to be on the rise. So that it's still an investigative process, but if you look at folic acid, so everyone thinks folic acid and you think of pregnancy and all these things that you need, but folic acid in your body needs to be converted to the active form of folate to actually be active. And it is estimated right now that about 60% of the population have some level of impairment in that conversion step. And folate is the driver of all cells. So this is it's important, and it hasn't really been brought to the surface as well as it will be very soon.
And my understanding is that that active form of folate, sometimes seen as methylfolate, if it's added, you may see that, is really what's able to cross the blood-brain barrier.
Yes.
Your brain. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, essentially the body doesn't have to do anything to it to recognize it. It just goes right up to the blood-brain barrier. There is no blood-brain barrier it crosses through.
Yeah, wow. So that's really a huge percentage of people who are having trouble with this. And so given that there's such an important connection between active available folate we're actually able to use, and mental health concerns, it sounds like a really good idea to talk about some strategies that people can use to find the active folate. And then, yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit about how people can kind of start to find maybe some of the activated folate even in supplement form too, if that's something they're interested in. So, so what resources come to mind for you?
For practical strategies of how how people can get things, this more folate, natural folate into their bodies. Well, what's prevalent in this isn't rocket science news. We talk about having an unprocessed diet and a clean diet, quote unquote, whatever the clean might mean. It does have relativity to where you're starting your diet from. Excuse me, but if in looking to get more folate, we want the dark green leafy vegetables, and there are great sources of that. Things like liver is actually one of the highest sources, but I'm not sure everybody has wonderful thoughts about access to that. Things like asparagus and avocado and lentils and quinoa and beans, split peas. These are all foods that when you, and dark leafy greens, so when you consume them, you're getting the body's natural active form of folate. There's nothing the body needs to do. What this has to be, and I know that you've just talked about it and we're talking about it, but to be clear that this doesn't mean supplements that contain folic acid, and you do have to look at those labels. There are supplements coming out that are methylated forms, including some great prenatal vitamins that are now on the market. But in an effort to, if we burden the body, which is what's going on by getting a lot of synthetic folic acid, which are cereals and processed grains and supplements that are just folic acid, we've actually caused inadvertently the burden that we're trying to alleviate. So the supplements have to be in the right form, and the foods more of an unprocessed, dark leafy greens and the foods that we mentioned, those should be in, you should be eating those on a daily, regular basis.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to mention here, too, I get this question a lot, that this is not something that you can necessarily check accurately in your blood. You know, if you went to your doctor's office and said, hey, can you check my folic acid level? I will tell you, you know, having worked for years in the hospital setting, seeing a whole lot of alcoholics who are detoxing, right? And that's the classic of folic acid deficiency, haven't eaten well in years, and I have never, I mean never, years, seen a low folate level, like blood folate level. And I think it's really probably twofold. One, because folic acid is fortified in so many foods, even really low nutrient foods. And also because it can potentially kind of build up in the blood, but it doesn't necessarily mean because it's in your blood, kind of like B12 has some similarities, that it's actually being used by your body, right? And sometimes people have high B12 levels. They're like, why are my B12 levels so high? You know, I haven't been taking a supplement. And it's like, well, if your cells aren't using it, it's not the right form.
Exactly. What's happening is actually, I don't know, and if you've had this, your experience, Sarah, but I tell my clients it tends to be expensive urine, because what's happening is the folic acid and other metabolites are sitting outside your cells, and they're not getting in. So to interpret the lab, you have to be careful how you interpret the lab. In fact, it would be very common for somebody with these deficiencies to have high levels because they're compensating with taking, for example, more folic acid. Well, I'm low, I need it, and all it's doing is sitting outside the cells.
Not being used. Yeah. These are like really fantastic tips, you know, and yeah, great job with just kind of outlining the big picture and then talking us through some specific strategies. Really appreciate, you know, all that info. As you think about, folate, mental health, this methylation piece, is there anything else that feels really extra important to mention as we wrap up?
Well, if we talk about methylation in general, and I know in flipping through our communication, there's a picture of a slide that you mentioned. You're welcome to pull that up because it will kind of explain it. Is that if you start with folic acid that you're getting in your system, and your body has to take all these conversion steps to break and convert that folic acid down. And that's how it becomes active folate in your body. The process, the key piece is what does the actual final conversion from synthetic folic acid to active folate do, is actually an enzyme it's called MTHFR. It's methylene reductase. It's a very long word, but it's MTHFR, and that's where the 60% of the population have trouble with this enzyme, if it even exists, or it exists and it has a faulty execution of converting that folic acid to folate. There are genetic tests that can outline the MTHFR genetic deficiency, and then there's all types of, you know, how serious is it for you, and those are left to genetic interpretation of what's actually found. But a lot of times you don't even really have to do all the testing if you have one family member who is positive, and you can try some methylfolate yourself and see how you'd respond, because the chances are pretty high. Okay. And so if we continue to look at what's going on the chart, and I do want to mention that if we talk about adding some methylfolate in general, I think it's important here to talk a little bit about a methylated B12, and in that spirit is sometimes adding extra folate can mask a B12 deficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And a B12 deficiency is pretty severe in terms of symptoms, neurological, and it's irreversible. So what I do with my clients is very simple. If I'm dosing them on some extra methylfolate, or they've really ramped up the natural forms of folate in their diet, I'll put them on a methylated B12 supplement that really I only tell them it's necessary to take it about 3 times a week. You could take it more if you wanted to, but it's that 3 times a week will be enough to prevent long-term deficiency, and then you're good to go.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And another just kind of word of caution if you're evaluating labs, right? To make sure that, yeah, because it can hide some of the anemia that happens with B12 deficiency. So important caution. Because if there's another good brain health nutrient, that would be B12, right? It really works.
Yeah, that's a whole other talk, yes. It's true.
Very good. Well, Alisa, thank you so much for your time, for all this detail. We'd love to hear, from anyone who has been, hearing about folate or methylfolate or folic acid. And if you've had personal experiences with, with certain foods, if you have ideas for getting in more folate, drop it all below, right? We love to read it, love to see it. And then, Alisa, where can people find you if they want some more info or want to learn more about your approach?
Well, my practice is Live Your Best 365. The website is www.liveyourbest365.com. And all the information to contact me is there. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter.
And keeping it simple.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, everybody, have a really awesome rest of your day. And the Food and Mood series will continue throughout this week. So stay tuned.